On to topic number 2, guys. UFC fight booking bonanza. This past week was absolutely nuts with the fight announcements, and off the top, Dana White confirming 3 new title fights. Some of them expected, most of them expected, but we now pretty much have an entire look of what the 2023 schedule looked like in terms of championship fights on the books. The first one kind of coming up time-wise, Jiri Prochazka and Alex Pereira for the vacant light heavyweight title at UFC 295 on November 11th, the 30th anniversary card. And then Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington, finally official. UFC 296 main event, December 16th in Las Vegas. And the co-headliner for that, a flyweight championship fight between Alexandre Pantoja and Brandon Royval. These are some big-time fights. I think probably the most logical ones out there, the ones that are probably the most deserving for all the contenders that have done their work, et cetera, et cetera. I guess let's just go around the horn a little bit and say, out of these announced fights, which one grabs your attention the most and which one is most exciting? Danny, let's start with you.
I'm going to go with Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington. And I think action-wise, this might not be the most exciting fight out of all those 3. I think it probably will lean towards being the less exciting one, if I'm being honest, but it'll still going to be a good fight. But I really like it because it's finally moving the welterweight division forward. This fight has been expected for months. I mean, it's just been, I haven't seen, apart maybe from John Jones, but even then you could make the case that, you know, he was kind of semi-retired, so it's different. But I haven't seen 2 active fighters that a fight has been teased and then, you know, it just doesn't materialize, or it just takes such a long time for it to happen. And the welterweight division is looking quite good, and there's a lot of young up-and-coming talent. So it's time to move the division forward, and finally we're getting this fight. I mean, we've been waiting for it for far too long. And first of all, you know, as you guys probably know in previous comments that I've made, I don't think Covington was a deserving guy here. So at the very least, make that fight quick just so we can, you know, get things going, but it hasn't until now. So we finally get this fight. I like it because it's moving the division forward, as I said. I also like it because I want to see what Leon Edwards looks like. I think he's kind of turning the corner, and I think he could be something great at welterweight. Right now, he's just seen as a champion, but I think in due time, he could be somebody that we could be talking about. You know, one of the greatest welterweights of all time, maybe not the greatest, that's still George St. Pierre, but I can definitely see him surpassing Tyron Woodley. I can definitely see him maybe even getting close to what Kamaru Usman did in that division. He's looking quite good. And as far as Covington, I also think that angle is super interesting. He is, I believe, like 34, 35, so he's getting up there in age. You must assume that this might be his last chance, and you don't really know where he's at in his career. He also hasn't fought in a while, and I don't really think the fight with Masvidal was also very telling on his skill. So I'm curious to see how he looks like. All around, just a very fascinating, intriguing matchup. So I'm going to pick that one. You're muted, Mike. Sorry.
Sorry, guys. That's a great choice, Danny. Definitely want to circle back on some of that. But Matt, what about you? Which one are you liking out of this threesome?
So in topic 1, we talked about the lightweight division needing to move forward. Danny just talked about the welterweight division needing to move forward. I'm going to go with the flyweight division. For the first time since 2018, we're getting a fight between 2 fighters not named Davidson Figueiredo or Brandon Morano. So this is a whole fresh matchup for this title, which is really exciting for me. We talk about all the time how the flyweight division, you know, consistently puts on some of the most exciting fights. And now we get 2 fresh names in a title fight, which is something that we haven't seen in years. So it's really exciting. And yes, the Davidson Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno saga was very important for the division because it gave, you know, more casual fans a sense of familiarity with those fighters. But now, you know, now that whole saga is behind us, you know, they've had their quadrilogy and everything like that, it's time to move on to some of these other names. And these are exciting fighters, guys. I mean, if you haven't really paid attention to what Brandon Royval has been doing, if you haven't been paying attention to what Alexandre Pantoja has been doing, these guys are on nice winning streaks. They get finishes. They go out there and fight their ass off. They're not boring fighters. This fight's going to be really exciting. It may very well still fight of the night if the main event doesn't do it at UFC 296. So I'm really excited for this matchup. Yes, these are all great fights that have been announced, but this one, for the reasons, like I said, it's a fresh matchup in that division, which is something we haven't seen in years. This is my pick.
And Nolan, your thoughts? They left a pretty juicy one out for you to break down.
Yeah. You know, Matt's right. I think Royval versus Pantoja does not get enough credit, especially being announced with these other two. But a fight that I don't think can get too much credit is Jiri Prochazka versus Alex Pereira. I think this is a fight that should be praised up and down. I think it is kind of the perfect storm of everything that we enjoy as an MMA fan, whether it be high-level fighting, whether it be big knockouts and striking, and just kind of that extra little sprinkle of absolute mayhem that I expect to come out of this fight. The craziness, kind of the car crash that we all love to watch, whether it's a whether it's a low-level fight or a high-level fight. If two guys go in there and brawl and some madness occurs, I mean, that's where our excitement stems from. So the fact that Danny talked about the welterweight division, getting that moving again, it's nice to get light heavyweight moving again after Jamal Hill vacated his title. So for me, this is just a no-brainer. Quite the supporting act for UFC 295, John Jones versus Stipe Miocic. I was kind of thinking perhaps the UFC was just going to put all its eggs in one basket when we looked at that card maybe a week ago, and we saw, you know, the next fight down was Jessica Andrade and Mackenzie Dern. So I'm glad that the UFC went with another title fight. I'm surprised that it was this one, because I think this one's kind of one that could probably headline on its own as well. Just a violent, fun fight, great supporting act, and at a big stage, big show like Madison Square Garden. Yeah, the UFC is on fire right now, booking these fights, and all three were great, but this one to me just speaks to my soul as a fight fan.
Yeah, I guess is the tiebreaker here for me. I'll definitely side with Nolan there. I think Prochazka and Pereira is an incredible fight. I mean, these two guys really don't have any ties to the John Jones era of the light heavyweight division. Neither of them could say a word between now and November 11th, and I think we're all going to be absolutely thrilled for this, because their fighting speaks for itself. It's going to be absolutely bonkers when they go in there. So I really can't wait for that fight. But kind of sticking with that, and you, Nolan, you mentioned there a little bit, like, this is the UFC's 30th anniversary card, right? Like, this is what we've been building towards with all this 30-year stuff since January. John Jones, having him on there against Stipe, I think that kind of speaks for itself for the magnitude of this event. I think probably part of the reason why they were able to do this fight with Prochazka and Pereira is because there's no pay-per-view points attached to it, because it's a vacant title. So it makes sense. But as you look at it now, I mean, it's not that far out. It's 7 weeks away, this card. Are you liking this as a 30th anniversary event? I'm sure there'll be more big fights added, but as you see it right now, like, you think this is fitting for the moment, for the celebration of what we're kind of looking towards through this 30 year of the UFC?
Yeah, it's tough, man, because, you know, you look at it right now, Tapology has 10 fights listed. So it's like, all right, you're probably getting 3 or 4 more fights in there. Where are those 3 or 4 more fights going to place, right? They're all kind of contender fights that will be, you know, main card, top of the prelims. Then we're looking at a really stacked card. If they're all fights that are going to be slapped on the bottom of what we already have, then that's a different conversation. So for me, I think you kind of need that next supporting act. I know, you know, Andrade and Dern, those are contenders, but I don't think it necessarily has that like feel of making the card feel really deep. We got Matt Frivola versus Benoit Saint Denis recently. That's a fantastic fight. I think that's a car crash as well. So I like that, those sort of fights where you can look up and down the card and say, ooh, this fight's, you know, the 6th of the night, and I can't wait because it's a banger. You need those sort of fights, but you also need kind of the connecting bridge between, you know, oh, this is a great fun prelim, and like, this is a fight that really matters in this division. So we'll see what happens, whether it's, you know, I don't know what other kinds, who's kind of available. I mean, we mentioned Dustin Poirier earlier. You got, you know, the other one that comes to my mind is Aaron Blanchfield and Manon Fiorot. Like, Blanchfield's kind of got the New York tie-in. I think that the timing of that might add up. So like you said, we're coming up on it here. So hopefully we'll get some clarity, but you would like to see them add a few more fighters with some stakes and some rankings next to their name to kind of really bridge that gap between 2 fantastic title fights and just kind of fights.
Yeah, what do you think, Danny? Do you think this is kind of enough meat on the bone so far? Do the 2 title fights do the trick enough, or do you need some more here for a 30th anniversary show?
I agree with Nolan. I think that that it could like in previous times. I mean, compare that great MSG show that we got with the 3 title fights and Conor and Eddie Alvarez headlining. Like, it doesn't compare to that, right? But we are in a different era. We are in an era where there's pretty much UFC fights every weekend, and it's hard to have stars to spread out through all those cards to make it worthwhile for a fan to, you know, take out a good chunk of their Saturday night to sit down and watch the fight. So I think under the circumstances that we're in of this era where there's oversaturation, where there's just way too many events, I think this is probably the best you can get. I do want to remind people, and Nolan did a good job at giving some shouts here to some fights outside of the main and co-main, but there are some other sneaky good fights that I would like to highlight. Matt Chanel versus Steve Erceg. I mean, that fight's great. Chanel gives you insane bouts all the time. Jared Gordon versus Mark Madsen. I think that's very interesting as well. Pat Sabatini versus Diego Lopez. That's going to be a crazy-ass fight. So there are some sneaky good fights here. So maybe name value is not what we expect for a 30-year anniversary, but I do believe action-wise, we're going to get a good night of fights with UFC 295.
Yeah, going to be interesting. I have faith they'll put at least one more big fight on there, and I think they should.
Can I say something else, Mike, if you don't mind?
Yeah, go ahead.
I hate to put this out on the universe, but what do you think are the odds for the winner of the co-main event to get injured and vacate the title?
Oh, God. Hopefully 0%. In this state of this division, I think anything is possible at this point. It's going to be wild. And it's going to be interesting having them kind of put this as a parallel next to John Jones. I wonder if he's going to take any little shots throughout fight week at these two guys and saying, hey, just a reminder, that's my belt.
Jiri Prochazka climbs mountains, and Poatan does a lot of risky stuff as well. Not wishing any ill upon anybody, but I think those odds might be live. Who knows?
Yeah, and you look in the comments, I think a lot of people excited for this one. Oatmeal26 saying Jiri versus Alex, the best one, no question. The reality filter, Jiri versus Alex is a real banger. There's a lot of excitement there. Oatmeal26 again says, I can't believe UFC didn't put Colby at MSG. I think it might have to do a little bit with what maybe Colby said in his relationship with John Jones, but also the fact UFC not wanting to spread pay-per-view points around for two fights. But I do want to circle back to Leon versus Colby. And with you, Matt, something that Danny actually said when he was speaking a little bit to this, is this Colby Covington's last chance at a UFC title? I mean, a lot of people, I don't want to get into, like, did he deserve it? Does he not? We're past that. The fight's happening. It's a couple months away. There's no going back on this. But Colby Covington lost twice to Kamaru Usman. Close fights in some respects, especially the second one that went to a decision. But he's been out for a long time. As Danny mentioned, he's aging a bit. Questions of whether he deserved this or not. Probably hard for the schedule he keeps up to shoehorn him into another title fight if he wins this one. So I don't know. What do you think? Is this Colby's last chance at UFC Gold?
I mean, if he keeps up this schedule of fighting, then yes, I would think so. I mean, his last fight was, March 2022. And it's, it's hard to really justify him getting this title shot even because of the activity. But here we are. It's set and it's going to happen. And I'm glad that, at least we have a title fight in that division. But to answer your question, I think as long as he sticks with this lack of activity, then yeah, it's going to be his last shot at gold. And I mean, it's a very tough fight for him. If he wins, I mean, he's probably, I don't know who they're probably not going to run it back with Leon if he does win. Probably going to find another matchup for him. But what does a championship reign with Colby Covington look like is my question. Because does he sit around and take one fight a year? I mean, I can imagine what, his interviews and stuff are going to look like. Obviously, I think we can all imagine that. But I'm more concerned about how often does he step into the octagon and put that belt on the line. Because if he does it once a year, it's going to be a very boring reign, however long it ends up lasting. But, I mean, it's just it all comes down to activity for me. If he goes out there and loses and then returns, depending on how he loses, right? If it's a close fight and if it's a close decision and he ends up losing and there's no injuries or anything like that, and he comes back in another 4 months and gets another win over a top name, then yeah, he can make another run at gold. But if he loses and disappears and comes back next year or another, 21 months from now, yeah, you gotta say, like, this is your last shot, dude.
Yeah, and before we wrap up here, I think something you said there about kind of what the Colby Covington title reign could look like transitions into a question from Night Owl there. Colby winning sets up the Islam Makhachev fight. Who doesn't want to see that? Nolan, we've already heard this from Colby Covington. It's not Bilal Muhammad. It's not Shavkat Rakhmonov. It's not any of these actual welterweight contenders on the rise. He wants to fight Islam Makhachev, a lightweight, give him that champ opportunity if they both win their next fights. I mean, is this Does this turn you off a little bit? Is this a fight you want to see, or is this just like something that you expect out of Colby Covington? He is going to try to look for these type of fights rather than fighting like Bilal Muhammad, who I think we can all agree deserves the next title shot based on merit.
Yeah, it's going to be a struggle, I think, with that going forward, especially if Colby wins. But I think kind of why I'm being sucked into the idea of the Colby versus Leon fight right now is because I don't think it's out of the question that Colby wins. So I think that it's a close fight on paper. So we could very well be entering 2024 with a trifecta of a Colby Covington, Sean O'Malley, and Sean Strickland championship, just as everybody predicted, coming into this year. So very crazy times at the UFC. This would certainly add to the mayhem. I mean, him and Islam, a fight would be very interesting to me, but I think that's this division, because of his inactivity or whoever's inactivity, why this fight wasn't booked sooner. Because of that, we're sitting looking at these budding contenders that are ready to go. And I think you need to, in order to kind of have any sort of sanity in a division, you need at some point, you can only push off somebody that's deserved it so far, and especially somebody that the UFC has indicated will be next. So for me, yeah, it's going to be a struggle. I'm sure we're going to hear all sorts of call outs for fights that will never, ever, ever happen. But hopefully, at least his first title defense can be kind of returning some movement into the division and taking on a top contender.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with that. And just wait till Bryce Mitchell joins that crop of UFC champions we made. It's going to be great times. But anyways, let's move on.